Then I'll go ahead with my talk, which is on confocal microscopy. And I'll try to explain to you why this is emerging as an important tool for early diagnosis of a host of corneal conditions, specifically keratitis of unknown origin. And here's a beautiful picture. I have no financial interest to disclose, and this will be the scope of my talk. So in a nutshell, to begin with, where do we use it? The detection and management of a host of pathologic and infectious conditions of the cornea. The one that comes to mind for most of us is acanthamoeba keratitis. Again, corneal dystrophies in the early stages and ectasias. A lot of work has been done on contact lens induced corneal changes, and there's a lot of literature on this, and this is important. Again, it's increasingly being recognized. As I said, it's emerging. So it's increasingly being recognized as something that can help in both pre and post-op evaluation of even refractive surgery. One of the earliest established uses has been as a surrogate. The cornea, as we know, is richly innervated, and it's being used to see peripheral nerve damage in a host of peripheral neuropathies, including diabetic retinopathy. It's also being used to prognosticate. And there's a lot about the limbus that we don't know. The healing patterns, the changes after chemical injury. And we're increasingly studying this to see the presence of niche, the presence of Langerhans cells, the palisades of Vogt have all been imaged, and these are all the exciting developments that we are now seeing. So it has evolved from being an established research tool to now being an important clinical tool, especially in tertiary centers. Now the instrument that we are all familiar with is the slit lamp. And fine, you look at a slit lamp and you get a lot of information. But what we know is that it has low magnification, only about 40 times. The in vivo confocal microscope gives you more than 700. So you get serial images of corneal microstructures. The other thing about the slit lamp is that the resolution is low. And this is because there's interference of light that gets reflected from structures that are above and below the plane that we are examining. So this interferes with what we are trying to see, and this is removed with a confocal microscope. Briefly, it was Minsky who described and patented the confocal microscope way back in 1957, and he used it to image the brain and to study neural networks of the living brain. The in vitro confocal microscope was established around 1980, and it was Lemp et al. Who described the in vivo technique that we use in a rabbit cornea. In 1995, the slit scanning in vivo confocal microscope was introduced, and in 2003, the laser scanning, of which the HRT3 is the one that we use. And simply saying what is confocal, it means that the illumination and the observation are focused on the same area. How does this help? It creates high resolution. So you see, but again there is no field of view. So you see the top photograph, you're seeing it in full, but you do not see what is surrounding. So it attenuates the structures, it dampens the structures that are around your point of focus. But again, you need a field. You cannot have a single point. So what it does is it scans. So you have a volume scan, and then it constructs a usable field of view which gives you both high resolution and great magnification. The commonly used ones are the tandem scanning based confocal microscope, the scanning slit, and which is the Nidec, and the laser scanning confocal microscopy, which is the Heidelberg retina tomogram with an added cornea module. So it was originally used to image the optic nerve head in glaucoma, and then by adding a modified lens system, we are now able to image the cornea beautifully. And this is the machine that we use, and essentially you put a drop of gentile gel, you have a disposable tomo cap that is used to abut the cornea. And these are images of the Nidec and the Heidelberg to examine various corneal microstructures. Now, in order to understand what's abnormal, we have to know what is normal, and you get beautiful images of various layers of the cornea. So here you have the superficial. Why is it? So you have the superficial epithelium in the top corner. And here you see large cells, more than 40 to 50 microns. They are polygonal. Usually the borders of these cells are fairly well defined. What you also get are nuclei. When you see the middle photograph, what you're seeing is that the cells are much smaller. These are about 10 to 15 microns. Again, the edges are well defined. You have bright borders. But here the nuclei are not seen. What you're seeing, the lowest photograph, is the Bowman's membrane. It's acellular. But what you see brightly there are the corneal nerves. So the subbasal nerve plexus is seen, and also collagen fibrils can be imaged. So basically you see that the Bowman's layer is acellular, and these are some of the microstructures that if you know what is normal, then you can also indicate what you can see what's abnormal. The next area that you see is the anterior and posterior stroma, and there is a difference between the two. And if you see the LASIK flap, or you see corneal collagen cross-linking, then these are the areas that get affected, and you can study them serially post-op to see how the healing has occurred. And what you see essentially are keratocytes, you have some interstitial substance, and you have collagen fibers. And there are more keratocytes in the anterior stroma than the posterior stroma, and the stroma, as we know, constitutes 90% of the cornea. The endothelium can also be imaged, but then again the specular microscope remains the gold standard for imaging the endothelium. So clinical indications, keratitis remains first and foremost. Acanthamoeba keratitis, specifically in the early stages where it looks like viral keratitis. If you have an imaging machine, it definitely helps. Fungal keratitis, a patient who has been treated for a long time, you may get negative scrapings even if you can scrape, and that's where you can use it. Again, bacterial keratitis as a negative, so there's no fungus and there's no acanthamoeba, and it's possibly then a bacterial keratitis because you cannot image bacteria, they're too small to be resolved. And also viral keratitis, there are certain changes that you see, like the loss of the subbasal nerve plexus, which is the reason why you get corneal anesthesia in viral keratitis. Also, there's activation of keratocytes in the anterior part of the corneal stroma. These are findings that can provide a clue that you're dealing with a case of viral keratitis. Again, certain corneal dystrophies, this is not what we would use primarily, but it can also help in early detection, also the depth to which you're seeing the pathology. So epithelial basement membrane disease, and the middle photograph shows you the thickened basement membrane. Also, to distinguish between Fuchs dystrophy and an early IC, iridocorneal endothelial syndrome, the confocal microscopy, there's been a lot of study done. Post-surgical or post-pharmacological, how the drug is working and further management. The confocal microscope also helps because reduction in the number of acanthamoeba cysts or reduction in the number of fungal filaments or the depth to which the fungal filaments have now gone. That all helps you in the management. Again, as I mentioned earlier, in refractive surgery, a lot of work has also been done on changes in dry eye and contact lens associated complications. The commonest indication and the one that we are most familiar with is diagnosis of acanthamoeba keratitis because misdiagnosis is very common here. And what you see are cysts which are highly reflective, bright structures. And these are larger structures, about 10 to 25 microns, and very often you see the typical double wall with a stellate inner wall. You can also distinguish tropozoid forms, but this again do not have like a typical structure. They can be round, they can be oval, or sometimes even amorphous. And also, as we know, there's radial keratoneuritis. So these swollen nerve cells can, the swollen nerves, can also be imaged because the trophozoids have a tendency to cluster along the corneal nerves. But what is equally important is that we have some experience because there are a lot of round structures that can be seen. So we need to distinguish it from inflammatory cells, which also come in when there is infection, from epithelial cells and macrophages. And again, for this, a little experience is required. There's always a learning curve. And these are two scans. So this is what we mean when we say, and you can see a whole host of acanthamoeba cysts, and then you see cysts in clusters. And this again, when we see it, usually indicates a bad prognostic sign, and the fact that this is going to be a very refractory long-term disease. And again, The other thing is, again, microbiology remains the gold standard, but like I mentioned, a patient who's been on treatment for a long time may show negative smears and or cultures, and then you can still image them with the confocal microscope, especially the deeper keratitis. And what you see are these reflective septate linear filamentous structures or parallel lines that may appear double wall, and here you can see a lot of fungal filaments, and that's what we see. And they can have an irregular branching pattern, and we're also studying whether, based on the branching pattern, whether the angle is acute or obtuse, whether you can distinguish between various species of fungus. Again, linear structures you need to, especially when there are very few filaments. Sometimes you get just one or two filaments in the late stages and you want to know if there's still activity. You have to distinguish it from corneal nerves, bundles of scar tissue, collagen fibers, also blood vessels. Microsporidial keratitis again is an emerging corneal pathogen that very often gets misdiagnosed. What it looks like is like the image on top, a non-specific entity. Sometimes can be, you may suspect that this is a fungus because the patient has been on long-term antifungal treatment. And again, confocal microscopy shows these hyperreflective deposits between the keratocytes, or even the spores. The ovoid spores can also be imaged in high magnification, and this also gives important clinical clues. Another thing that we've all learned is that post-LASIK there's some amount of corneal anesthesia, which is why you can have dry eye. And these are nice photographs which show the corneal microstructures pre-LASIK, and you see that the normal cornea has a lot of corneal nerves in the subbasal plexus. 1 month post-op, you see there's a complete depletion of corneal nerves, and then about 18 months post-op, you see that, yes, the nerves have started to regenerate. So that's what I said, the evolution and healing response of the cornea, the cellular responses can also be learned. And these are some of the review of literature. There's been the role of confocal microscopy in the diagnosis of fungal and acanthamoeba keratitis, good paper, and also the value of scrapings, because microbiology, remember, remains the gold standard. But if you remember that sometimes in slow growing fungus, it may take almost 3 weeks for you, and you cannot wait for that long to start treating your patient. So this becomes an important diagnostic modality, and if it's not available with you, then you can also refer your patient and have them referred back just to find out if there is any evidence of fungal keratitis. The limitations, as I mentioned, there is a learning curve. Observer experience, you need to learn to cut out the noise. Every round structure is not a cyst. And to some extent, you need patient cooperation. But having said that, because with the Heidelberg, the tomocap lightly touches the cornea, but then again, unless the patient is in very severe pain, usually cooperation is not a problem. Then again, if there's imminent perforation or marked thinning, you would not do it. In summary, it is rapid, it's non-invasive, it's in vivo, in real time you can see, and that's what you can then treat your patient. It has very high sensitivity and specificity once you have got past the learning stage. Its value as a standalone observation, investigation, of course microbiology, as I mentioned, remains the gold standard. Great magnification, very good image contrast, even in hazy media. And in a cornea that is edematous, you may not be able to image it with a specular when you're trying to look at the endothelium, but you can get good images with the confocal. And of course, early diagnosis is key. So in conclusion, non-invasive, reliable clinical tool for assessing the cornea, both in health and in disease. It's valuable for diagnosis, for prognosis, for follow-up to decide whether you want to continue with medication, especially in cases like acanthamoeba or fungus, which is long-term treatment. Thank you.